Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Richard Fleming, and today is Friday, the 5th of February, 2021. In today's video presentation, I'd like to discuss three fundamental topics regarding SARS-CoV-2. The first is gain of function of the virus known as SARS-CoV-2 that leads to the disease COVID-19. The second is the definition of a biological weapon and the agreements that the United States has entered into to not participate in the development and dissemination of such biological weapons. The third is informed consent. What defines experimental research? What rules do we live by as a society that prohibits experimentation upon people without their informed consent, so that you and others can look at the treatments you're receiving and the vaccinations that people are receiving and ask yourself the very fundamental question: is the process of informed consent being followed? Does this represent a potential violation of international law and Biological Weapons Convention Treaty and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights? And more importantly, what should you do about it? Let me begin again by sharing my screen with you. As I've previously had the opportunity to point out, since the initial discovery of SARS-CoV-1 in 2002, and with MERS in the 2005 to 2007 period of time, considerable research has been focused on gain of function. Back in 2013, Dr. Zheng Li at Wuhan Institute, and approximately that same time with Dr. Ralph Barrick from the University of North Carolina, research began with these investigators and undoubtedly others to look at a way to increase the infectivity of viruses. As noted here in this slide, in 2015, Dr. Zheng Li's paper noted that there were mutations that were introduced into the virus in an effort to dramatically increase the infectivity of the virus. This was funded by US funds and perhaps others. The very definition of gain of function has been defined by the Department of Health and Human Services, as we see in the upper left image here, with the stipulation that there should be restrictions upon gain of function, if not all-out prohibition in the United States of gain of function research. In the lower left panel, and I apologize because in this enlarged screen, my mouse does not appear to allow me to show it. Under the Public Health Emergency Science Safety Security, gain of function studies or research that improves the ability of a pathogen to cause disease help define the fundamental nature of human pathogen interactions, thereby enabling assessment of the pandemic potential of emerging infectious agents, informing public health and preparedness efforts and further medical countermeasure development. They may entail biosafety and biosecurity risks. Therefore, the risks and benefits of gain of function research must be evaluated, both in the context of recent U.S. biosafety incidents and to keep pace with new technological developments in order to determine which types of studies should go forward and under what conditions. Subsequently, a moratorium was placed on gain of function research in the United States. However, as we've seen, that has not prevented gain of function research being funded by Health and Human Services, the FDA, NIH, and other U.S. federal government agencies. A biological weapon, by definition, is a variety of microorganisms that can be used as a biological weapon. Agents are commonly chosen because they're highly toxic, obtainable, inexpensive, and easily transferable from person to person, and can be dispersed in aerosol form. Viruses compose a major group of this, of which there's several that are noted here, including smallpox, Ebola, Zika, flesh-eating viruses and bacteria, with the distribution method primarily through water sources or aerosols. And a great deal of consideration is given to the concept of how to address that. In the Biological Weapons Convention Treaty, at a brief balance, last reviewed in March of this year, the Biological Weapons Convention places a ban on the development, stockpiling, acquisition, retention, and production. Let me check something here. Perfect. Thank you. Of biological agents and toxins of the types and in quantities that have no justification for prophylactic, protective, or other peaceful purposes. Weapons, equipment, and delivery vaccines designed to deliver these agents or toxins are also in violation of the treaty, and the transfer of these agents are in violation of the treaty. During World War II, the Medical Association of Germany went along with just about everything, if not everything, that Adolf Hitler proposed. I had an opportunity in my younger years to speak with physicians who'd been members of the German Medical Association during Adolf Hitler's period of time. And to a person, they reflected to me that they simply went along with it because they felt they had no choice. Afterwards, at the Nuremberg trials, the rest of the world viewed that in a considerably different light. Acquiescing to something that is wrong doesn't make you right. It simply makes you someone who enables people to do things that are wrong. And that, as we saw with World War II and every other incident since then, does not alleviate people of responsibility or guilt. Following World War II, great efforts were undertaken to try to prevent future catastrophes that occurred in Nazi Germany during World War II and Europe. Some of those efforts included protecting individuals from being experimented upon, like Mengele and other Nazi scientists and physicians did. As a result of that, through the efforts of Eleanor Roosevelt and others, an international covenant on civil and political rights was established, of which the United States and most other nation states in the world are signatories and have ratified it. In this document, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, there is a specific issue on experimentation under Article 7, where it's very clearly stated that no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment. In particular, no one shall be subjected without his free consent to medical or scientific experimentation. This article, taken from 1996 in the British Medical Journal, details 10 standards that were laid out following Nuremberg, an establishment of the Nuremberg Code of 1947, of which I'd like to read. Permissible medical experiments. The great weight of the evidence before us, this was at the Nuremberg trials, to effect that certain types of medical experiments on human beings, when kept within reasonable, well-defined bounds, conform to the ethics of the medical profession generally. The protagonists, those proposing, of the practice of human experimentation justify their views on the basis that such experiments yield results for a good of society that are unprocurable by other methods or means of study. All agree, however, that certain basic principles must be observed in order to satisfy moral, ethical, and legal concepts. The voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. This means that the person involved should have legal capacity to give consent, should be so situated as to be able to exercise free power of choice without the intervention of an element of force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or other ulterior form of constraint or coercion, and should have sufficient knowledge and comprehension of the elements of the subject matter involved as to enable him to make an understanding and enlightened decision. This latter element requires that before the acceptance of an affirmative decision by the experimental subject, there should be made known to him the nature, duration, and purpose of the experiment, the method and means by which it is to be conducted, all inconveniences and hazards reasonably to be expected, and the effects upon his health or person which may possibly come from his participation in the experiment. The currently deployed vaccines from Pfizer and Moderna, as well as those currently proposing that they be provided emergency use authorization by the FDA, are exactly that. They are experimental. They have not been approved by the FDA for safety or efficacy of any individuals. This is today's National Clinical Trials website. And as you can see, despite the EUAs admitting over and over and over again for both Pfizer and Moderna, lacking sufficient information to participate in the knowledge of the safety and efficacy of these vaccines, you can see that today Pfizer is active but not recruiting. Similarly, you can see that Moderna's trial is active and not recruiting. So we have clinical experimental research going on without active recruitment of patients, and yet people are being vaccinated without, without, I might add, informed consent. The duty and responsibility for asserting the quality of the consent rests upon each individual who initiates, directs, or engages in the experiment. It is a personal duty and responsibility which may not be delegated to another with impunity. The experiment should be such as to yield fruitful results for the good of society, unprocurable by other means or means of the study, other methods or means of the study, and not random and unnecessary in nature. The experiment should be so designated and designed on the results of animal experimentation and a knowledge of the natural history of the disease or problem under study that the anticipated results justify the performance of the experiment. Informed consent. According to the Code of Medical Ethics, Opinion 2.1.1 from the American Medical Association establishes that the process of informed consent occurs when communication between a patient and a physician results in the patient's authorization or agreement to undergo a specific medical intervention. In seeking a patient's informed consent or consent of the patient's surrogate, if the patient lacks decision-making capacity or declines to participate in making decisions, physicians should A, assess the patient's ability to understand relevant medical information and the implications of treatment alternatives and to make an independent, voluntary decision. B, present relative information accurately and sensitively in keeping with the patient's preference for receiving medical treatment. The physician should include information about the diagnosis, nature and purpose of the recommended interventions, the burdens, risks, and expected benefits of all options, including treatment, and document the informed consent conversation and the patient or the patient's surrogate decision in the medical record in some manner. When the patient surrogate has provided specific written consent, the consent should be included in the record. In essence, the vaccines currently being used are by definition experimental. They have not been approved as safe or effective by the FDA. Patients are not being advised of the data that is missing. Data are not being advised that the vaccine does not prevent them from obtaining or acquiring SARS-CoV-2, or in other words, it doesn't prevent patients from becoming infected. It does not prevent patients from transmitting the virus to others. I've spoken to several patients about this, and I've heard multiple comments from people on social media, through email, and a variety of sites where people have gotten vaccinated, and they are under the impression that once they are vaccinated, they can neither acquire nor transmit the virus. This is not what the emergency use authorizations state. At the current time, the vaccines are an experimental protocol. The two NCI, the National Clinical Trial sites, show that the companies are no longer recruiting for their experiment. Patients are not signing informed consent. Neither are they being informed of the risk and the potential benefits of these vaccines. This violates the International Covenant on Civil and Political Treaty. It violates the Nuremberg Code. It violates the American Medical Association ethics, and I'm pretty sure it violates a number of other national and international laws. At this point in time, with this information, it is now your obligation to take this into consideration when you or others that you know, love, care about, family members, friends, decide either to receive treatment for or vaccination of SARS-CoV-2. Hopefully this information provides the type of knowledge that you need to have a better understanding of what's going on. The implications of a virus that has been modified by gain of function, by all accounts that we have available. The failure to have treatments available that across the board appear to be beneficial, that physicians are not able or do not feel they're able to provide in either the outpatient or inpatient settings, and the utilization of vaccines that are experimental at best, provide evidence of violations of informed consent by those not providing the information to you and others receiving treatments or vaccines. It is a violation of the Nuremberg Code, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and by all appearances, the Biological Weapons Convention Treaty. This is Dr. Richard Fleming. Today is Friday, the 5th of January, 2021.